Hello friends, Jenkins here, bringing you another Dota 2 video on behalf of Dota Alchemy, and speaking of friends, this video is actually an idea that came up in a conversation between a Patreon subscriber and I, Zach Dudek. He's a Patreon subscriber, like I said, who frequents a lot of our streams and supports us a lot, so we love him to death. Shoutouts to him for this idea. But in any case, this video is going to be on what to do after you've actually won a team fight. This is probably one of the most important things that you can think about to differentiate yourself from the average pub player and therefore gain a lot of MMR, because most people in Dota just fight as if the games are death matches like Call of Duty or something. Don't really think about why they're fighting. As a result, they're going to get a lot less from team fights that are going to happen anyway than somebody who's thinking about objectives. And by objectives, I don't actually just mean towers. There's a lot more objectives in Dota than just towers. Once you've won a fight, you basically have 20 seconds to a minute of time where the enemy team, even if you only killed one hero, is going to be scared of you. And therefore, if you move together, or even alone, the enemy team will not feel comfortable contesting you in an area, because if they do, they risk losing even more. So therefore, the time after you've won a fight in Dota is extremely important, because it's one of the few situations in which you have a clear advantage, almost no matter what. So you want to get absolutely as much as you can from this downtime. Once you've won a fight, there's a number of things that you can do depending on a few different factors, including, number one, you can take a tower. This is easily the most obvious and probably the first thing that you should look to do after winning a fight, simply because it's the least complicated, lowest risk way of capitalizing on the enemy team losing a team fight, especially if you won a team fight near a tower. It's extremely easy, low risk, and game winning to execute a tower push when the enemy team has less heroes than you. Generally, either they lose the tower, or they fight to defend the tower and they lose more heroes. In either case, you almost always get a lot out of a move like this. This is exactly why fighting near the enemy's objectives is so important in a Dota game. It makes it incredibly easy to just rotate over and quickly take a tower after winning a fight without risking them respawning and wiping you. I would argue that if you were capable of playing every pub where you keep your team focused on fighting around objectives and taking set objectives when you win fights, this fact alone would probably gain you a shitload of MMR. Because in pubs, most of the time there's just no strategy at all being executed, and this is one of the simplest and most effective ways to win a game. Obviously it's easier said than done, but if you can get people to execute this, it's not hard to execute and it's very game winning. Number 2, take Roshan. You should do this when you're near the Rosh pit at the end of a team fight in general, and the later and later the game goes, this is probably the most important note about Roshan, the more and more value Roshan has over all the other objectives on the map, because pressuring high ground is extremely difficult without an Aegis. Thus, the later and later the game goes, the more you should look to take a fight around Rosh, just like I said you should be taking fights around enemy towers, so that way, if you're in the area and you're in an advantageous position, you're going to win a fight and then just safely take Rosh, and you're not risking the enemy team taking Rosh and preventing you from high grounding them. So therefore, then you can pressure their high ground safely. Number 3, take control of an area with wards and vision. This is probably one of the less obvious quote-unquote objectives that people think about after a fight, but this is often one of the most important things that you can do in a game, even over taking towers or Roshan, depending on how late the game is, especially if it's one of those games where you feel like your team is just slowly getting picked off over and over again. Sometimes this is because you haven't actually established a safe area on the map, and you need to win a team fight in order to do this. You should do this when you have no wards on the map and the game has felt very dangerous so far. Also, you can do this when you just want to play the farm game and do it safely. Furthermore, you can do this when you're looking for crucial opportunities to take fights, rather than just taking any fight whatsoever. In other words, when the game is relatively even, you should do this, which is obviously very often. For example, you can take control of an area around a tower, and then you can siege that area much more safely because you'll see people teleporting in. You can also take control of the Rosh pit, and then you can sneak the Rosh, you can take the Rosh, and if the enemy team contests you, you can fight them. It essentially gives you options. You can also take control of the enemy jungle. This is most commonly what you want to ward when you're trying to play the farm game. You want to farm in the enemy jungle because it is just the safest area of the map in the mid game. Number 4, deward an area, aka take back control of an area. This is strong for 2 possible reasons in a game. Reason number 1. The enemy team has spent their time securing an area, and you, in 30 seconds or less, when you've won a fight, clear all of the wards in that area with sentries. Given that wards are on such a long cooldown, and usually the enemy team wards in one area that all of them are occupying of the map for a good amount of time, usually you can leave the enemy team without vision for at least a few minutes by doing this. This can be absolutely devastating to the enemy team, especially because even if people aren't thinking about vision, subconsciously the enemy cores will play around vision regardless. That is, if you deward all of their wards, you will be limiting the farm of the enemy cores heavily. Even if the enemy team isn't smart enough to think about vision, this will still happen because everybody plays Dota off of instinct. Reason number 2. You actually want to secure an area that the enemy team has wards in. For example, if they ward up their own jungle and you want to play there because you're trying to play the farm game, you'll basically be guaranteed to lose the game if you try to occupy that area when they just see you. You need to deward. But sometimes it's not that easy to just run into their jungle and deward everything because they'll look to fight you because you're standing in their vision. So, essentially, you need to wipe the enemy team in a team fight, then deward that area, and then secure it and occupy it. Number 5, push all of the waves in. This is probably one of the most underrated things to do in pubs, and to combat the fact that this concept is ignored completely, even by immortal players, I've heard professional players refer to the waves as objectives to just really hammer in the fact that they're on the same level of usefulness as something that's traditionally considered an objective, like taking a tower. Similar to Roshan, the later and later the game goes, the more value pushing in the creep waves has. If waves are pushed into your side of the map, there are a lot of problems that are occurring. Problem number 1, if you go to gank, the enemy team will know already because you won't be dealing with your towers taking damage, so it makes it incredibly obvious. Problem number 2, your vision is restricted because your waves will be right by your base where you already have vision from your towers, so you will very literally be getting less information off the map if creep waves are on your side of the map. Number 3, you can't get towers. You can't get tier 1s because you won't have creeps to tank them. You can't get tier 2s because tier 2s have backdoor protection unless there's creeps near the individual tier 2. And you can't get tier 3s because tier 3s have backdoor protection if there's no creeps within a radius of the Ancient. This is actually something that is very important to take note of. If you have all tier 2s or even a couple of tier 2s, then pushing in the creep waves is incredibly important because one creep in one lane takes backdoor off for all of the tier 3s, which means that tier 2s are extremely valuable to take, and once they're down, pushing creeps becomes even more important. Problem number 4. The enemy team can force you back to your base simply by being in a lane and showing their presence. This is a problem, and a strength that you don't want to give to your opponents. Conversely, of course, if you have creeps pushed into their base, then you have the advantage of being able to force the enemies back simply by being in a lane. This is quite possibly the number 1 strength of pushing waves into your opponent's side, and quite possibly the reason that pushing waves is the most important thing that you can do after winning a team fight in Dota most of the time. Number 6, take the bounty runes. The reason this is an important tactic to note is because it's incredibly high value and incredibly low risk. In fact, depending on how late into the game you are, it's just as high value in terms of gold gained as taking a tower, or more. Not only is it high value, it requires only one person to have the presence of mind to do it. If you're the guy who takes note of the 5-minute mark and picks up every bounty rune after one team fight, especially if you're a support hero or a hero that can't contribute to a fight due to low resources or not having cooldowns, then you can gain your team a tower's worth of gold by teleporting to the opposing side of the map after a fight and grabbing those runes. This is the number 1 thing that you'll see extremely high-rated supports do consistently because they realize how much value these runes have, and that if they don't teleport to take them immediately after a fight, then where are the enemies going to go to? Of course, the opposing side of the map from the fight that they just lost, and then they're going to grab those bounties for free, but those bounties could easily be yours if you teleported immediately after a fight to grab them. Unless you're the carrier mid, of course, then you should probably be hitting a tower or a creep wave, but if you're an offlaner or a support, it is incredibly high value to get those bounties. Number 7, hide in the trees and wait for enemy respawns. This is something that is pretty important to do if you're a ganker in particular. Setting up for the next gank, especially if it's on an important and otherwise very hard to kill hero, can be incredibly valuable. If the enemy team is dead, then they're going to be sitting in very safe positions, like in their base, on the opposing side of the map, and so forth. So you can get into a position that you otherwise couldn't. For instance, you can get into the trees right next to a tier 2 easily when the enemy team is dead, but if they're alive, chances are somebody's going to be farming that area, or maybe you'll run into a support who's warding. If you're a support or an offlaner, sometimes the best thing that you can do is set up for your next move while the enemy team is dead in a way that you could not achieve while they're alive. Number 8. Kill more heroes while the enemies are dead. This strategy is without a doubt the highest risk but also highest reward strategy you can implement after a fight. Absolutely do not do this unless you are sure of your actions. This is a strat that you'll see a lot of SEA teams commit to basically over anything else because that region is just insane, man. Those guys just like to fight. For example, most North American or European teams, they'll win a fight, they have the opportunity to end the game right then and there, but they just take a Roshan or they take a Rax. SEA teams, they will dive Fountain in order to kill you, have you buy back, and then kill you again and win the game right then and there. The problem is, that is an incredibly high potential to throw the game, but it also allows you to win a game in 30 minutes instead of 45 minutes. So once again, this is a perfectly reasonable strategy. In fact, it's quite possibly the highest skill thing that you can do after winning a fight. A lot of tier 1 teams will make these judgment calls. It's just incredibly hard to make the call. If you're not 100% sure that you won't die going for kills or sacrifice an important objective that you could get otherwise, then you should probably avoid doing this. But if you really think that it's going to work, go for it, because you could win the game right then and there. So that's it for this video. I know there's a lot to it, but my biggest recommendation would basically be to pick one of these things in this list that you don't think that you're doing, you think you should do more, figure out what the best situations are to do it, get comfortable with it, make sure you're instinctively doing it in games, and then move on to something else, and then eventually you will essentially have all of this instinct, you'll be doing the right things after fights, and you'll probably be winning a lot more as a result. So I want to quickly at the end here just cover 2 things that are very, very bad to do after fights and why. Because this really is where the conversation started between Zach and I. Basically, don't ever farm jungle after you've won a fight. That is just not abusing the fact that there is this downtime where the enemy team is weaker than you. That farm is going to be there regardless. You're not progressing the game forward in any way by farming jungle. You don't run to creep waves or jungle camps that your allies are already farming. That farm is already going to be accounted for, and you being there and farming it is not going to, do anything. Because those camps have to respawn anyway, right? So it's just gold wasted that you're not farming elsewhere. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I hope to see you guys in another video.